Okay, so I hope everyone can hear me well, and there's no background noise. Um, I'm gonna have to work out the video situation, uh, which means, so anyway, the purpose of this video is to talk about a upcoming project I'm gonna work on with refactoring. It's something I've been wanting to do for a couple of years. I've been looking at it and contemplating it and trying to put together resources and been researching how it could possibly be done or if existing solutions have existed. The idea is essentially creating an automated refactoring tool that takes your existing code and cleans it up and gives you something that is potentially better, hopefully. There's a couple problems with it. The first is is figuring out the names. So the solution to that is, I think, simply having an automated, just a generic generated naming scheme that sort of you go in afterwards and rename everything, um, or simply create a map where it'll take your existing map and apply that map name to the end result somehow. So that's something that needs to be worked out. The solution I'm going to go with is the former. It's just simply to output a name and require the person to rename the function, class, variable, so on. Um, so it's sort of like the obfuscation tools, except it's supposed to make the code better. And I'm really thinking that the code will have comments that sort of tell you what area, what lines, so that you can better name and understand what the refactoring tool did. So the technique that I'm sort of gonna attempt is more a functional with a object-oriented data style. So there'll be objects that are um, so when you go through a function, it will take the it will take the data, make it an object, and then apply that object to another function. And then when you go through that function, it will apply that data object, uh, stream that through the functions, and give you a result. So any local variables will be in an object, and that object will be passed through those functions, and potentially. Um, so the well, I mean, ultimately the techniques and whatnot will have to be tested. So the idea is sort of go through and test these techniques, see which ones work better and whatnot. But ultimately, the goal is to take is to figure out patterns that exist in the code and break those out into separate, smaller chunks, if not already. So if your code is perfect or damn near perfect, this tool won't really help you. It's really for a legacy system. I'm probably gonna have to redo this video. Um, but I'll do that later. So yeah, so the idea is to take a legacy system and refactor it, take common patterns and create functions, classes, interfaces, and sort of clean up any duplication, sort of streamline any of the common flaws that legacy systems have. So the biggest thing would be take a um, where the view is in with the PHP code. The best project is PHP. I should have mentioned that earlier, but I'll have to take notes on this video. It's more a stream of consciousness, so I'm going to do a better video a little bit later. But yeah, so let's take the PHP code, separate the views from the PHP code into separate files, and I do want to eventually get to HTML and break that out into uh, common areas and separate those views into their own files and reuse common parts in the. So, I mean, take a header. Normally, you have a header part in with the code, so that piece would be separated out into its own separate file and included in the files where it exists, and also create views that are more generic. So not simply take HTML that is duplicated, but sort of figure out what HTML is similar, and then break that out into its own separate files, and then create variables that will accept the differences. Um, so, I mean, if you echo out something or the code is very, very similar, actually take it and create a view that is generic enough that it can be reused as many places as possible. Something that's pretty damn difficult because you're going to have to create code. And um, that that borders on machine learning. So, fuck, that's gonna be hard. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's the goal: is to create something that just breaks out your code into common patterns and reuses those functions, um, and sort of condenses your code to where, instead of having to spend a couple months refactoring your code base, you can just run this tool. It will iterate through your code and give you a result that's hopefully would only take you a couple weeks, or a couple months, depending on how long it takes to refactor the names and whatnot. So probably have a tool that actually goes through and renames and does all that for you. So if you're like, well, I want to rename this function to this, it will go through all the code and then do that renaming for you in all the places where that function is called. The other idea is to there's multiple techniques that I want to sort of research. The most basic would be to take patterns, create a function, and reuse those functions in the code, and then allow you to simply decide whether or not you want to create a interface and sort of take it from there. So the code just simply creates a pattern, it senses a pattern, and it creates a function, and it just allows you to do whatever you will with that end result. That's the most simplest way because you're not really creating any code. You're simply taking existing code and moving it to a new location with a new function with a automated generated name. Well, I mean, that's a part of the research will be to figure out how useful that is. How often do you actually come across code that fits a certain pattern that can be reused? And that's part of the that's the question I want to answer to. Certain code, I think it really depends on the code base. So a certain code bases, if they're really legacy, are probably going to be horribly written and will easily fit into this mold where it will sense, hopefully, the patterns, take them out, make a whole bunch of functions, and you're left with something that's much, much smaller. And that's ultimately the goal. The goal is to take code and make a smaller code base from that. If you don't have functions, it will probably be a lot smaller than if you have existing functions and or classes that the um, tool has to go through and create new functions and whatnot. Beyond that, the idea is to, as I said earlier, create objects and hopefully interfaces and insert that into the function and sort of break out your functions into a pattern, into a interface, and then call those methods, the interface prototypes in your function. So each function would have its own interface, um, and it would break out the function if it's a large, um, function into smaller chunks, and then call the interface in your code. But that'd be in a separate set of functions, and the original function will just call those new functions, which will accept an interface. So, I mean, that really shouldn't be that difficult if all you're going to say is take this section, put it into this method, prototype, take this section, put it in its prototype, so on and so forth, and then uh, apply the data, the parameters to it. But ultimately, the goal should be to create something that's more intelligent, that can say, well, not only do you have this common pattern, but you have these data variables that are similar named and in multiple places. So let's just like create a interface that sort of fits that mold, that pattern, and then reuse it in as many places as possible. Having an interface per function is not that useful. Um, really, the workload of having to go through and audit the new interfaces and the code base probably create a bigger mess than it's worth, to be honest. So like investigate that, sort of figure out the best way of doing that. I mean, ultimately, all these techniques probably be combined in some way. Take the best um, um, behavior of all the techniques and combine them. So certain techniques are going to have the behaviors that are not that great, or just too damn difficult to implement correctly. So it'll simply be researching and implementing something that functions well, and ultimately taking as many techniques that work and putting into a cohesive product tool, and then shipping that. And hopefully it works well. I thought of making an online service actually. So yeah, I mean, the idea was to take create like a learning machine learning. So apply it to Google's machine learning and Microsoft's machine learning, and hopefully get something out of that. But I mean, the problem is simply being able to take to apply the learning tool correctly. to actually get code that functions right. So if you create an online tool that takes existing code and learns from the code in some way, then that should help the refactoring. Because if it takes a look at the code that's poorly written and says, well, this looks similar to this, and this was refactored in this way, so let's change that code to look like this. And so the project might end up a multi-year project, given depending on how long it takes to get people to use an online tool and sort of create something like Code Wars, where you're refactoring. Fuck. Where you're refactoring existing code that's open sourced, or people have allowed to snippets of code to be refactored. So the machine would learn from that. So it would refactor it one way, and then a person can go in and say, no, this is how you should have refactored this code, and sort of learn from the mistakes, and gradually over time, hopefully build a tool that, I mean, it basically goes in, it can not comprehend, but figure out the commonalities and break out the code and give you something that is much, much better based on the experiences of actual humans that can comprehend code and give something that's much, much better. So, but the first part is simply the refactoring, taking the code and figuring out a base set of techniques that work well enough that a website or online service could be created from that, because no one's going to use a tool that sucks until it gradually gets better. And I mean, part of it also is simply to use it on my personal projects and, do research that way. So using the personal projects to refactor, train it myself, but then gradually, as it gets better, have hopefully more people would go into it, and it will learn and improve through the machine learning with Google and Microsoft. And part of that also is to research an idea that I had where so something that I've read was that, well, okay, so I will say I don't actually know the literature of artificial intelligence. I haven't read any recent papers. This idea has probably already been thought of. I mean, everything's been thought of. Um, so the idea is to use both Google and Microsoft, and train both, but differently. So part of it will go off into Google. Okay, so to break it down into simplest terms, create multiple brains. Attempt to create multiple brains. So you don't want to get to a point where I'm sure this problem's already been solved. I mean, this is obviously a big problem. You don't want to get to a point where your machine learning is stuck on stupid, so to speak. So you want to have it the fitness um, applied to multiple brains and sort of attempt to get the best result from that. So one brain might give you a different result. The other brain might give you a different result. I mean, obviously, you would want that, and then the human would simply try to see. Well, okay, so basically a neural network of neural networks. Ultimately, so essentially, the brains would just simply be a quote person end quote in the idea that it would have a memory of how it was taught, and you would have multiple brains, and you would choose selectively from that based on the fitness of the parent neural network. So you would have a sort of trainer that would go in and, based on feedback from the human, sort of not only train the, I'm going to say, ch- children neural networks, but sort of pull in and mix the two. So not only, so it would sort of mutate the brains and create a new brain. So if you have two brains, um, they give you a result. You'll take a look at that, and that parent would apply its own sort of mutations to it, or accept the changes from the human and apply that to the code, and push that back out to the brains, as well as sort of push it out into a third brain, or a fourth or a fifth. And then gradually you would eventually get to a point where um, the children are learned enough that they become trainers, and they sort of create children on their own and train those. So you would ultimately get a hierarchy of um, children that are more intelligent, create better code, but ultimately the parents are um, the smartest. They have the most experience. So knowledge. So I mean, it would be based on knowledge and experience. So that's the separation. Is that the trainer communicates with the human, which communicates the trainer communicates with the at the start the children that it's interacting with, and then gradually those graduate into parents themselves, and they have children. And the idea is that the children don't really know anything. All I know is that this code is beautiful. This is the way code should look like. Whereas the parents, not only do they know how the code should look like, but it has been trained on modifications to existing code on how to get to that point. And the idea would be to push that out slowly to different children, and then, but not all at the same time. So you don't push all your knowledge to each child, and apply that. And then gradually, the goal would be that you would get mixed results back. The parents would take a look at it and compare it with what they know, and then create a new result based on what they know, based on what the children gave them, pass that to the trainer, and then pass that to the human to see whether or not the results are satisfy their goal, and then to push that back down so that each child learns and each parent learns. Um, I'm not sure how well that would work. I mean, if I've read literature on artificial intelligence, which ultimately I think I'm going to have to do because a lot of these solutions already exist, possibly. There's a lot of smart people who've been working years in artificial intelligence, so I highly doubt that any of my ideas are new. That's just improbable. So, reading the literature on it, it would hopefully give some um, indication on how I could improve the idea. Take a look, hopefully, at the mistakes other researchers have made, and hopefully not make them myself. But from the research papers, I don't really think they add mistakes. They just have the solution, which kind of sucks because you don't want to make the same mistakes they do. I guess the solution is good enough ultimately, given that you want to start with what works and then go from there or learn from there. Sort of like I guess, children. I mean, ultimately, it's the same thing. The researchers are the parent or the trainer. Well, I mean, the teachers would be the trainer. And the current researchers would be the parent, and they're passing knowledge back down. But as a child, I'll be starting with no experience. I'll have the knowledge, but no experience. So it's just simply be building experience and then graduating to a parent and passing on, um, I guess, my knowledge to the next generation. To put it in human terms. And I mean, that's ultimately the idea. I mean, it just comes from biology. Neural networks come from biology as well. I mean, artificial intelligence is based on biology. So this idea, I mean, obviously has been thought of prior, but I mean, I simply want to. I don't think I'll have access to a lot of research papers, given that a lot of them are probably behind a paywall, and I won't have the money to purchase. I'm not going to pay $25. If it's just a subscription to access unlimited amount of papers, then yeah, sure, I'll do that and start reading. Most research papers are not that long, um, or at least the ones I've read. So, and those are just functional programming. They're about 15 pages, whatever. So I'm kind of hoping the artificial intelligence papers aren't massive, like 100 pages or so. They'll probably be dense. So it probably takes some time to understand what they're talking about, and then I guess eventually trying to implement the solution, if there is one, or applying the knowledge that they're releasing in the research paper to what I'm attempting to do. Um, but I think at first I'm probably just going to go with this human or trainer or a teacher, child, and then a teacher, parent, child. a generational passing of knowledge, and see how well that works. And then once that is done, hopefully go out and figure out if find a paper and read some literature on hopefully what I've been working on. Obviously, the first part is going to be the tool, and I've probably gone longer than what I meant. So I'm definitely going to have to create a new video and formalize this idea and condense it into 10, 15 minutes. And then create a new separate video talking about the abstract future planning as a note to myself. I'm probably going to do a presentation. That makes more sense. But yeah, that is the project I'm hoping to start next week. I have to look at WP Network and WP Network Query, as well as WP Widget again. And I'm probably going to do a video after I create a patch going over certain improvements that I made to WP Widget. I think that's small enough that I should hopefully have that done over the weekend, both of those done over the weekend, and be able to focus on this refactoring project Monday or Sunday night. I doubt it, though. It always takes longer because you have to comprehend. This is a tangent, and I'll talk about that Saturday or Friday night. I'm giving a presentation tomorrow. I mean, as long as this video is going to be taken down anyway, no one's probably going to watch this. So it'll give me time to improve. Well, I'm going to rewatch or re-listen to it and take notes and create a presentation and sort of formalize and do better with the next iteration. Stream of consciousness. But yeah, I believe that if this project can take off, that it might be able to change programming. I don't believe that it will, given that it's probably most likely going to fail or not achieve what I think or hope it will achieve. But I see. Well, I forgot to talk about the last technique. The last technique is category theory with functional programming. So, sort of applying functional programming with category theory thrown in with PHP and sort of creating a functional code base. So if your procedural code, break it out into a functional code base, and if you're object-oriented, break that out into it would still keep the objects, but the objects would be applied in a more functional way. So you would have functions that manipulate the object and pass it down, whereas the methods themselves would it would attempt to create immutable object as opposed to a immutable one. So any of the instance methods would give you a new object as opposed to, um, well, I mean, if possible, if the method returns this, then it would pass you a new instance with the values. So it would add a new value and then pass you um, a new object with those values, with the mutated value, as well as the existing unchanged values in the new instance, is what I mean. So I think that is all that I have. Well, might as well go into this as well, as a note to myself. Part of the idea also is to apply transformations to the code from one language to another. So if you want to go from PHP to Java or to Go or to Python, part of machine learning process would be that as well. So ultimately, I'm going to have to build a parser as well as a syntax tree that is generic enough that it sort of is spread against a lot of all possible languages, and then sort of program transformations to support those languages. So if not all languages support a function overloading or method overloading, and those that don't would have to have different names. So you would have to apply different names with the parameters, or if it's um, loose typed or a language like PHP or Python. And when I say that, I mean basically it's not going to create a variable of a type and reassign and assign that variable with a value of another type. It'll create a variable of a of whatever type the value is, and would only pass in the same type into that value. So it's not going to reuse variables that might create problems, like with languages that once you set its loosely typed, or I forget the technical term. I'm going to look it up. I think it's loosely typed, where you can assign a type, whatever type you assign a variable, it has to stay that type. You can't just down the function later on in the function or method reassign a different type to that variable. It'll break. PHP isn't like that. I don't think Python is like that, but I don't code that way, so I wouldn't know. Um, but I mean, I would have to look it up. But yeah, so the idea is to create transformations from one language to another, as well as attempting to create a beautiful code. So it would, if you go from PHP to Python, it would transform the views into the Python views, like based on different libraries. So whatever library you want or is supported, it would transform the PHP views to the Python views. as well as creating idiomatic Python code as much as possible from PHP. So that's ultimately the goal, is to remove the dependency on a particular language. If you have a tool that can transform a project from one language into another in the matter of moments, um, allowing you to focus on certain human details like names, um, as well as restructuring any flaws that the automated process works. And I almost forgot, but one last piece is the focus also is going to be creating test cases, both unit and integration. So if the tool works as well as I want it to, it should be able to actually create test cases, um, edge security, um, so on and so forth, as well as create the um, test doubles that might be necessary for the unit testing. So um, the idea is to not have to create test doubles for unit testing. Um, since the code is going to be generated, that static analysis should already be built in. Um, I mean, it doesn't have to do static analysis because it already knows types. It already knows the code. Generating tests as well as test doubles shouldn't be that difficult, and it should be able to create as many as possible to fully test the code. And I think not only creating test doubles, but actually creating a quick check test as well. So actually creating tests that generate the values as opposed to creating a manual list of values. Doing that instead. That should be entirely within the realm of reality and what's possible. Once you have the ability to take code, existing code, and transform it into new code, creating a test for that new code should be entirely possible. Well, again, that is going to be part of the research of the project and a question that I hope to answer. But yeah, I mean, you shouldn't have to unit test any of the code, and hopefully you'll be able to go back and create unit tests for the existing code as well. I think I meant that as to be a different project, but it might as well be the same, given that a lot of resources are going to be going into the singular project, as well as if it does become a online tool in the future, um, after a lot of this research has been completed and a solution, hopefully a viable solution, has been created. Implementing at least the basics of all of this, creating tests would definitely have to be part of it. Creating the integration tests, um, hopefully, would also have to be part of it as well. So if one piece of code interacts with another piece of code, actually creating a test for that, you're probably going to end up with a shit ton of tests, um, a fuck ton. But it should be fine. With the quick check type tests, as well as test doubles. Um, Hopefully, the code would be able to reduce the amount of tests down. So, remove the redundant tests. So, start with a shit ton of tests, and then iterate down to as few tests as possible, but still test um, enough of the code. so that you'd be able to run all the tests and it would be able to finish as quickly as possible. Um, Having a test suite that takes a day or two doesn't really help you if you're trying to continuous integrate that into a project. You can't have a test suite that, I mean, test suite has to run within an hour. Most likely, you want a unit test to run within a minute. Integration tests probably take a little bit longer, and system tests even longer still. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, um, the solution should remove as much time um, that's needed from you. So the amount of time you should be spending running tests, refactoring, that should hopefully go away. And that's the goal that I have. I don't know if I'm going to succeed. Probably not. Probably going to fail. But a failure, I'll learn from that. And I'll be able to, hopefully in a year's time, if it does fail, learn from that, do some more research, and come back and create a new project. I'm actually kind of hoping that I at least succeed in parts, because I do need a tool that helps with the refactoring. And if I have to start at some basis that does a few things well, and then slowly over time add to that, then that's something that I'm just going to have to do. One last idea that I had earlier today was the idea of decoupling, or not decoupling, coupling the code. So in WordPress, at least, it calls functions. So the idea is to take functions that are called and inline those functions, and to sort of see if additional patterns could be created from inlining those functions. So basically, you might be able to discover something that you might have missed if you just take a look at the code as it is, if it's decoupled. Um, and you're like, well, no pattern exists because it calls this function, which is different than this function. So you might miss out different patterns and different better patterns that might exist if you inline those functions. So sort of break it out and couple or inline the functions to sort of see what additional patterns exist. And I think that's ultimately all I have for now. The next video is probably going to come out a couple days, or probably tomorrow. I'm probably going to work on this tomorrow after the presentation. But I have to give the presentation tomorrow, so I'm going to have to work on that, and that's priority. It should go well. I mean, people won't realize how half-assed or quarter-assed it is, but I have enough right now to go an hour, and I might actually have enough to go past that. At the worst case, I'll have to create, I'll have to live code the solutions, but I mean, that's fine. I would rather have code that exists and pull that in and explain it. That'd be much quicker than having to type out the code and do it then. But the code basically already exists. It might make more sense explaining it, doing it live coding. But I think I'm not going to have that much time with the presentation to actually live code. I have 22 slides. On average, it's about a minute a slide. So I have about 22 minutes. But most likely, some of those slides are going to be, or I have 27 slides, I should say, minus 2 or 3, which probably be covered pretty quickly, given that it's the title screen or the title slide, closing slide, and questions slide. Those 3 added to 27 would be less than a minute, or potentially a minute, and then the other 22 would be between a minute to 5 minutes. So, I mean, I have anywhere around 25 to 35 to 40 minutes with the amount of slides I have now. So I need to cover 20 to 30 minutes. Worst case, 40 minutes of code, which is easy. I mean, fuck. That amount of time, I should be able to live code easily, demonstrate the idea. And if I finish early, that's okay. Going the full hour is the max. I can't go over an hour. I can go less than an hour. I can go 45 minutes, and then get the fuck out of there and do the follow up to this video. But I think going a full hour, I think it's much better. I think I kind of owe it to the organizer to go a full hour, and as well as the attendees to give as much information as possible, provided they're coming and spending their time with me as I talk. But I can probably see I could talk about nothing for an hour if I have to. My plan was to go over the presentation, sort of beta tested, but I didn't do that, and I'm probably gonna have to do the code prior to going to sleep, given that I'm probably not gonna wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. to do the beta presentation as well as code. So I'm gonna stop this and do that, finish that up.